talk a bit about long-form journalism. Is that correct?
Він каже, що він хоче поговорити про лонг-форму журналістиці, довгий текст. Yes, it's true.
Okay, let me to introduce myself quickly. I mean, obviously, you know, I'm Dave Hendrickson. I am the Sunday editor, among other things, at the Daily Press. So I tend to be involved in just about all of our larger project stories. I've also spent several years writing for a Sunday magazine before I joined the Daily Press. So I have many, many years of experience at writing long stories.
Can you tell us about some of your recent story?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. You know, as an editor, it's fun because I get to work with a lot of reporters who are trying to write a long story for the first time, and these are people who are used to covering government meetings. You know, they're used to running out to a fire and 15 minutes later having online, here's what happened. And one of the things that I've learned is you cannot take that approach if you're writing a long story. You really have to break it down into pieces, you know. And I always tell my reporters that, you know, the first thing they really need to do is think about the story idea. Is this something that actually will work as a long story, as something that we may run over a number of days, or that instead of a standard 500 words might be 3,000 words or more? And not every story is. You know, so it has to have really interesting characters, and it has to have a compelling story, which makes it sound, you know, a little bit like we're writing for television or writing a novel. And the truth is that sort of approach can help. You know, I'm finishing a story for this week that we have been, it's the final chapter of a story that we have been writing for 5 years. And it is a heartbreaking story about a man who is 53 years old and developed early onset Alzheimer's disease. And his family wanted to use their experience to bring awareness to this problem. So they agreed, they knew he was going to die, and they agreed to share his final years with us. So we have revisited them just about every year, and the gentleman died earlier this month. So what we are working on now is the final chapter of his story. And it is a story that, you know, if I can digress just a moment, you know, a lot of what we do as a news organization really is short, fast, here's what happened, and we move on to the next thing. We put things online a dozen or more times a day, and we sometimes get the feeling that readers are not going to follow a longer story. Let me tell you that I do not believe that, and that I think every good story is going to find its audience. This story, one of the elements was that the family did not have the resources to pay for his medical care. When our readers heard that, they started sending in money. And they sent in ultimately more than $60,000, which was enough to provide care for his last year of life. And that is, I think, the sort of effect that a long, well-written story can have. An approach to that sort of a story, this story has actually gone through 2 reporters, and I mentioned it's been 5 years. And the reporters working on it are good news reporters and needed some help in approaching this story. And I'll tell you, if you were planning to write something that's going to be thousands of words instead of hundreds of words, I'm going to take you back to your probably, early years of learning how to write, when you were first learning how to use an outline to write an essay. And I don't make anyone do anything, but if my reporters are writing a long story, I tell them I want to see their outline before they start working on the first draft, But that's just a suggestion. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, here is chapter and verse of here's exactly how the story is going to be from beginning to end. But you have to sit down and plan that out, at least in rough ideas, so that you can identify, I like to think of it as the chapters of a story. And if you can at least identify, here are the chapters, here are the segments, and here's what each chapter needs to include, when you sit down to write, it eliminates a lot of fear. And I don't know if any of you have ever dealt with fear as a writer. But I will say I don't know of any writer who has not dealt with fear. So, so breaking it down into those chunks allows you to just focus on this one section rather than trying to get yourself from the first word to the last word some 5,000 words later. While you're in the process of writing, this is going to change. If it doesn't, you might not be engaging enough with the story. So if it changes while you're doing your writing, you just sit down and readjust, where am I going from here, so that you again establish that outline, that roadmap, whatever you want to call it. So again, the key being that you break it down into manageable chunks. Another tool that I try to get my reporters to use when they're doing what we call narrative stories is to steal tricks from books that they like. If you've read any thrillers, any murder stories, you know that at the end of each chapter, there's some little hook there that encourages the reader to turn the page. It's the potato chip that gets the reader reaching back into the bag. And if you're breaking down a long story into segments, you want to try to do that. You don't need to be heavy-handed with it, but you need to encourage readers to keep reading each step of the way. And, we have done that, whether it's one story that we're going to run as, a couple of thousand words that might fill up 2 full newsprint pages, or if it's something that we're going to break down into segments over the course of a week. That's the other thing that I think you need to figure out when you first approach this, is how is it going to be published? How is it going to hold together? Is this something, is it a topic that we're exploring? Are we talking about, dealing with the problem of an increasing murder rate? If it is, what you might want to be doing is looking at a story that covers several days, but you actually break it down into a number of different stories. So the first day might be, your introduction. The next day might be, what is the police response? The next day might be, here's a look at the victims. Another approach is to take a single murder and say, we're going to look at all of that, but we're going to tell it using this one murder as a framework for the entire story. And if you do that, what you're writing is basically almost a chronology. You might want to start with the murder scene, the way a mystery does, and then go back to the beginning of this person's life and retell his or her life story up until the murder, and use that to say along the way, what was the police response? Looking at how did this person end up in this situation? And if you do that, I mentioned that you can be looking at this as a number of different stories. If you want to take this approach, you can look at it as one long story that gets published one chapter a day for however long it lasts, which is, I don't know what the newspaper tradition is there, but in the States, that used to be a regular feature of newspapers. They were called serials. It's how a number of novels eventually got published. It's being published a chapter a day or a chapter a week. And we've done that with a number of stories that readers have reacted very positively to. We had one story about a gentleman who he was a financial advisor who was really well thought of in his community, and one day went to pick up his mistress, got on his sailboat, and disappeared. And we just told that story over a period of I don't know how many days, starting with him sailing off into the sunset and then going back and trying to figure out how he got there. And, we were able to notice one day to the next, even though, the page views were going up, the single copy sales were going up, these are all good things. And what we did each day is we had a little box that just said, here's the story so far. Just like you might see at the beginning if you're watching a television series. Just like you might see at the beginning of an episode, previously on, previously in this story, here's where we are, and then get the reader into today's segment. I mentioned needing to plan these things in advance as you're writing them. Beyond that, I might get in trouble if any of my bosses hear this, but beyond that, I think you need to throw out almost all of the rules that you live by day in and day out when you're telling stories for a newspaper. With the exception of this stuff does have to be true. Everything has to be verifiable, but you are free to take any approach that feels right for the story. What is the best way to tell this long story to our readers, to our viewers, and go for it. Let me stop here and just ask if you all have any questions. I realize I'm just kind of rambling here, which I don't allow my reporters to do.
Я так зрозуміла. А що він хоче, щоб ми поставили якісь запитання?
Окей. Які у вас питання є? Може, які вони інструменти використовують? Чи вони просто розповідають ці історії?
What tools do you use for Longreads?
What tools? Did I hear that correctly? What tools?
Yes.
Do you mean physical tools like notebook, recorder, video camera, or storytelling tools?
Storytelling first. Hi. First of all, we are talking about storytelling tools, maybe software, maybe some like websites or something like that on website on internet.
Okay. You know, I think you use the tools that the story calls for. You know, Jonathan can feel free to jump in because I know one of the things that we do try to do that helps get the readers from the beginning to an end of a long story is online. We may have additional information that that just goes beyond. It provides a richer experience than what people can get with the physical newspaper. It's often helpful to put together a timeline. And there are any number of software programs that you can grab that will help you put together a timeline with photos, with graphics, with snippets of video. You know. I will tell you my favorite example is if you can go to the New York Times website and and look up some of their multimedia projects. They really have turned multimedia into an art form. And in general, I think the stories that they put the most effort into are magazine-length stories. And as the reader is going through the story, there are the opportunities to listen to a bit of audio from one of the people that you're reading about, to watch a short video that is the person that you're writing about answering a question, or maybe it's a secondary video about some expert who is talking about some element of the story. Again, the internet is this huge candy store. And I think the real challenge is deciding what are the best sweets you want to indulge in. What works best for this story. We don't have the tools that the New York Times does. So if we're writing a multi-day story, we will want to be sure that each day has some multimedia component to accompany it. It's likely with us to be a photo gallery and or video of the person speaking that day. Whatever video lines up with that day's story. Jonathan, anything to add along that front?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Hello.
Okay. Hey, I probably saw some of you guys the last time we did this. My name's Jonathan Heater, and I work on our website and some of the graphics that we use to give additional layers to storytelling. We use a bunch of them, and most of the tools we use are free. Like, for instance, I can share a screen and show you guys some of these.
Jonathan, I'm sorry. Can you give us a time for translating?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, sure.
Translate.
Да, в основном орієнтуються на безкоштовні інструменти. який може просто збагатити цю історію, яку вони публікують. Окей?
So when we start out with the story and we get a little bit of an idea of what the story is going to be, we have to determine what tools fit best with that story. Not every tool works with every story.
За кожну історію підходить кожен інструмент. Треба в залежності від ідеї вибирати інструменти, які можна використати. Окей?
So like a map, for instance, we like to use maps. People always want to know proximity, where things happen in relation to them, but we have to be careful that just because we know places exist, that doesn't mean there should be a map. The map has to work with the storytelling.
Якщо може бути, як приклад, інструмент це карта. Але не всі карти можна так застосовувати. Якщо подія безпосередньо стосується людей, або ви хочете показати напрямок, або ви хочете показати простір, значить тоді можна використовувати карти з додатковими позначками, історіями і так далі. Окей?
And the hope is that every interactive or infographic that we use, the hope is that it can tell its own story. If someone just came across it, they could get exactly what we're trying to provide, the information from that graphic.
Ну тут, по ідеї, це те, що...
So let me share this. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Окей.
Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So here's a thing we did for a deadly tornado that happened in a locality somewhat near here. We wanted to show what the damage to a school looked like before or right after the tornado, and now what that area looks like now. So we built a slider that shows you this is what it looked like the day after the tornado, and this is what that area looks like now. So it gives readers a perspective of change over time.
Це у них було торнадо у 2011 році. От вони вирішили зробити з допомогою таких слайдів, як виглядала територія школи до того, як це трапилося. Точніше, день після торнадо і так, як зараз виглядає.
For the presidential primary that we had here in America, leading up to what we had called Super Tuesday, which is maybe 14 or 15 states voted in their primaries, we built a map that showed where every presidential candidate had visited leading into that Super Tuesday. So you can see a key of the different colors. So you could see where Donald Trump visited leading into Super Tuesday.
Ще вони робили карту для їхніх президентських цих праймерізів, назвали її Супер-четвер і показували, куди, в який штат, яке місце, який з цих кандидатів їде.
Let's see what else. We have a major naval shipyard here in Newport News, and part of a story that we were writing about last fall, which was an anniversary of the first ship being built, we decided to find every ship that had ever been built at Newport News beginning in 1890. So there was, 534 ships. So we put them into a database, and so if you know the location or the name of the ship or what type of ship, you can cycle down your results to see every ship that's ever been built at our naval yard, or our shipbuilding yard. Sorry.
Того року у них була якась там річниця, до них є корабельна компанія, і вони склали таку базу всіх кораблів, які побудували там, це понад 500. Ну і то можна пошукати, якщо ви назву знаєте.
With these tools, there's a university in Chicago, some of you may know of it, called Northwestern. And their website is nightlab.northwestern.edu. And all of these tools that I just showed you are there. They're free. Most of them just take a Google spreadsheet or some sort of a spreadsheet to make them work.
Тут є якийсь сайт безкоштовний, цей Night.
Ну, це сайт це університетський Nightclub, так званий, і у них от є декілька інструментів. Це таймлайн, дуже класний інструмент. Потім є інструмент Juxtapost, це якраз цей слайдер, можна безкоштовно використовувати. Принцип дуже простий. На сайті ти завантажиш собі на сайт дві картинки, бо вони десь на інтернеті можуть бути. І просто вказуєш дві адреси, картинка справа, картинка зліва, і підпис там, припустимо, 2013-2015. І міняєш слайдером, можна подивитися, як змінилось там простір місць. Це досить таки цікавий інструмент. Окей.
And we mostly use Google for most of our mapping. So we use maps.google.com or Fusion Tables, which allows us a little bit more versatility when it comes to mapping.
Google Fusion – це, якби, скажімо, інструмент для збору даних. Якщо у вас великий масив даних, наприклад, це аварія там, чи злочинність, хочете їх використати з прив'язкою до карт, ви їх там можете там редагувати. Ну, але це більше вже така журналістика даних, виходить, що ви це використовуєте. Окей?
So questions about infographics? Go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to toss out a question. What projects are you considering?
Які проекти у нас? Що ми можемо зробити? We are in process actually because we have several kinds. For example, we have projects about historical events in the city, then some social events or social issues, and the third one is about let's say it's like urban studies of the city, where we are trying to tell citizens of our city how to develop communities, how to develop streets, ecology, etc. So like instructions, or like stories of visual content.
Those are all good ideas and ambitious projects.
Thank you.
Let me, to try to focus on one, the history project. What can you give me some more details about that?
Антон, можете розповісти більше про свій історичний проект?
We would like to use, for example, on this Night Lab site, there is a tool which is called Gigapixel. It is about telling stories based on paintings, on pictures. And we would I'd like to create like a simple story with about art or about history of art based on pictures of local painters. So it will be like an educational story, for example.
So with using Gigapixel, and you may already know this if you used it, you have to have a very, very, very high quality image.
I know.
To start with. But I think using words to tell that story and then using the Gigapixel as a supplemental experience would be really cool. And Dave could probably talk about tracking down the historical and how to proceed with that.
As for timelines, we'd also like to use this timeline tool from NightLab to tell the story of our city, for example, in some kind of stories of citizens of our city with using old photos of our city. So our historical project.
Have you guys used the Night Lab stuff before?
Yeah, yeah. For my
pretty
education.
awesome.
Huh? Sorry?
It's pretty awesome.
I know. And besides Night Lab, do you use any other tools, or it is enough for you, or just?
Yeah. Let me share the screen again.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a German website or set of tools called Data Wrapper. Do you know of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we use Data Wrapper a lot for databases, simple graphs. You know, we probably don't use it nearly as much as we use MATLAB or Google Maps, but we probably use it mostly for databases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you use so-called, I don't know, ReadyMark web publishing platform for page creating like a independent digital projects for your newspaper? ReadyMark.
We don't use that now. For more detailed mapping, we may use Tableau.
Uh-huh. And how much time do you need, for example, for project? Is it I'd say effective to use such tools to create the stories? Or maybe it will be easier to create simple stories based on your website, and that's all.
Some of the tools that I use, you know, I can put together a timeline or a pretty simple map in, you know, an hour or so. Some days I spend more time than my boss would like working on the stuff. 8, 9 hours.
Could we say that it enhances the content of website or journalism? It helps actually or not?
Yeah,
Or
well, I think we think the best help we get out of it is raising engagement time. So having people in a story longer, and you know, Dave talked about the story that's coming this Sunday. That is probably going to be 100 inches, or what's that, like, you know, thousands of words.
Yeah, it's about 3,500 words.
Yeah, so you want to have little nuggets throughout, because not everybody. If you tell a great story, a lot of people are going to stick with it, but not everybody learns just from words. There needs to be visual nuggets that also, as you go, you know, there are breaks in the words, and it also just enhances the story. I mean, I'm of the belief, and Dave may disagree with me, that sometimes no matter how good your words are, the emotion in a video can't capture that in words. So having a person crying or having a very emotional video is that you can't supplement anywhere. So it just gives people different visual entry points and keeps them in a story longer.
I'll halfway agree with Jonathan.
І, можливо, не в такому масштабі, як це там постійно це робити, але це дозволяє трошки збільшити залучення аудиторії, тобто, що вони знають про ваш ресурс, не тільки там їх просто новинили, а ще ви створюєте додаткові проекти, які можуть бути цікаві читачам чи глядачам в такому дусі. Тобто це ви стаєте платформою, яка може гратися з форматом. Ви маєте паперову, ви маєте свою електронну версію, але ви ще можете додаткові якісь формати почати роботу. І, в принципі, журналіст якби має знати, що такі формати існують, що є Алла Карпової, там, гуру по картам, да? Тобто, ні, ну чого, це ж карта, це досить цікавий інструмент, простіше на карті показати якесь місце, там, поставити маркер і розказати, ніж це буде просто голий текст з якогось одного фото. I
will say, you know, of course, a great writer who has full command of the language and is very confident can paint a brilliant picture, and part of the fun of reading words is that you come up with whatever in your mind that you're painting. That picture's been painted, so in your mind you're seeing what that writer is trying to tell you, and there's nothing that can replace that.
One thing, if I could jump in again.
Він говорив про те, що дуже важливо, тобто Дейв і цей Джонатан, вони сперечаються, бо Дейв більше прихильник слів, а Джонатан каже, що як би там прекрасно хтось не писав, але все одно, коли ти бачиш на відео емоції людей, що це більше до того. Тому він за прихильник таких всіляких штук підтримує думку. Окей, зелений.
Okay, no, I was just, the word that I heard is, can the online enhance the story? And what I would encourage you to think about, it's like, it is not so much enhance, as though it's just supporting matter. When you're starting working on a story, I would suggest thinking about what is the best way to tell this story or to present this information. There are many stories where where a video or some sort of a graphic really is far better than a written story. One of the examples I like to use is a government budget. There is just no way you're going to write a story that is going to have readers on the edge of their seats. But it's important information. And there are times, I think, where if you take those numbers out of the story, excuse me, and present them graphically, ideally in some way that readers can interact with them, and use the story, use the words as analysis. And then what you have is you have those two pieces that are working together. And that, I think, is where we all ultimately want to be, is where they really are interrelated rather than two separate things, if that makes any sense.
Говорить про те, що потрібно, коли починати писати історію, думати, перш за все, як хочете презентувати, щоб показати, як розповісти, як скомпонувати ці ж графіки, карти зі словами і так далі, щоб воно гарно виглядало.
Окей.
One of the things, and again, to continue to use government budgets as an example, one of the things that I've seen other media outlets do is create a tool that allows readers to make changes in a budget and see what effect it actually has. Excuse me. I think it, again, was the New York Times a few years back put together an interactive graphic on the federal budget so that readers could say, well, we want to add $1 million, or $1 billion at the federal level to homeless programs. So the readers were allowed to do that, but they would then see, to accomplish that, you're going to have to cut the size of your military, or you're going to have to raise taxes. And I think if you can give readers that sort of hands-on experience, it really helps them understand what can be a fairly difficult concept to explain in words.
Next. What is next?
Де розказував про графік щодо їхнього федерального бюджету. Показували там ці мільйони доларів, що їх тратять.
Це теж таке бюджет.
Треба нашу шукати якісь дані, такі, що можна було. Що ще можна було запитати? Що вас цікавить? А? Все?
We are thankful for you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm glad we had a chance to do this.
Yeah, thanks so much.
So for the next meeting, we'll prepare several stories and we'll present you for your estimation. Okay?
Oh, it's great. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, that would be terrific.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye.